Hi, and welcome to Heartland Institute College Planning's program 2021-2022 FAFSA presentation. My name is Amy Leach. I'm one of the coaches with the Heartland Foundation, and I'm going to go over what you need to do to fill out your FAFSA and some common mistake areas. If you have questions about this presentation, email your Heartland coach. They can answer those questions for you. First of all, I want to talk about why you need to fill out your FAFSA. FAFSA is the first step towards any financial aid award, whether it's need-based financial aid or merit-based financial aid. If as a student you don't have a FAFSA on file, you can lose scholarship dollars because colleges can't award funding if you don't have a FAFSA on file. Who is eligible for FAFSA? U.S. citizens are eligible for FAFSA. Eligible non-citizens are eligible for FAFSA. But if you are not a U.S. citizen, you can still fill out a FAFSA, especially if you're an international student or an H4 or H5 visa student. In doing that, while the college isn't going to award you federal aid, they may award you college aid from the college or state aid. So you can do that. If you don't have a social security number or anybody in your family doesn't have a social security number, like a parent, you're going to put zeros in the social security box. The first thing you want to do is to prepare for the FAFSA, and the first thing you're going to want to do is set up your FAFSA ID. Now, your FAFSA ID is really important, and it's important that you keep it someplace safe and someplace you're going to know, because you're going to need to use it every year until you're completed with college. Same with parents. I encourage both parents to set up a FAFSA ID as well, because that allows parents to upload their tax information directly into the FAFSA. And it makes things so much easier. The parent can log in to a student FAFSA. And if you're a parent who has multiple kids attending college, you only need one parent FAFSA ID and you can still log into both your kids' FAFSA accounts. Make sure you use your name exactly as it appears on your social security card. If there are not enough spaces, just end where it ends. So if your name runs over, just finish it where it finishes on your social security card. It's fine. Colleges should be able to link the FAFSA to the student account based on that information. At the bottom of the page, there's the website for the FAFSA ID. This website will also be on my last page of the presentation, and I'll leave that up at the end so you can take a screenshot of it. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to apply for the FAFSA. There's the website to apply for FAFSA. I tell people it's easier to do on your computer, because when you get to the end of it, you can hit print this for my records and you can send it to your coach. You can also complete the FAFSA on your phone. There are two apps there. The nice thing is you could be working on the FAFSA on your phone and then log into the website as well later, at a later time when you're done with it. That works too. The two accounts are linked together and connected. So whichever works for you to complete the FAFSA is fine. So here are some documents you need to get ready to complete your FAFSA. Student and parent or legal guardian's FAFSA ID, and I encourage you to set those up ahead of time in case there's a problem. Your federal tax return and other income documents, social security numbers, both student and parent, alien registration number if you have that, your driver's license, and that's just for the student. We don't need parent's driver's license here. Most recent filed tax return, W-2s, and other records of money, stocks, bonds, investments. Those type of things all need to be in there. Like I said before, most parents and students, if you filed your taxes electronically, you can auto-upload your taxes through the IRS data retrieval tool. I have to tell you, this makes filling out the FAFSA so much easier. Using the data retrieval tool, it takes about 2 minutes. Otherwise, you should plan on spending about an hour looking at your tax return and figuring out what it says on the FAFSA and what lines from your tax return need to fall into what lines on the FAFSA. So know that that's coming if you can't use the IRS data retrieval tool. Additional information you may need: untaxed income, things like child support, veterans non-education benefits, disability, records of untaxed income, current information from your checking account balance, stocks, bonds, and other investments. And I'll talk later about how those assets are reported on FAFSA. So the FAFSA has 7 sections. Section 1 through 3 are all student information. Section 4 is parent information. Section 5 is non-dependent students, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So I'm going to start first with sections 1 through 3, the student information section. Students are going to put in general demographic information, name, address, driver's license number, if the student filed a tax return, the question about if they're eligible for FAFSA. Question 22, this is for male students, and this one is critical because if a male student isn't registered for selective service, they are not eligible for any federal financial aid, including student loans. So it asks if the male student is registered or not for selective service. If the answer is no, then they're given a second question and they can say, register me. Now, I know a lot of parents are concerned about their sons having to be registered to be drafted into the military. That's what selective service is. But I want to assure parents that your son is going to get registered for selective service. When he gets his driver's license, if he registers to vote, all of those things will automatically register a male student for selective service. So don't feel like by signing up for FAFSA, you're setting up your son to be selected for the draft. Additionally, the last time the draft was instituted in the 1960s, all male students who were attending college were not eligible for the draft. So if you were in college, you couldn't be drafted. So just know, don't make that a reason not to complete a FAFSA, because the funding you could lose by not having one on file probably isn't worth that, knowing that your child's going to be registered anyway. Question 30 always trips people up. Your child is working on their first bachelor's degree. All students are working on their first bachelor's degree, even if they don't know what their major is, they're undecided, they're attending a community college. You're still going to put first bachelor's degree. This makes you eligible for the most funding. Question 29, if you are a senior in high school, even if you've taken concurrent enrollment and a few college courses, you still have never attended college, first year undergraduate student. In section 4, the parent information, again, parent demographics, household income and sources of income and investments, and we'll go over that in much more detail. Question 72 is new this year, and it asks about household size. So for the first time, so this is the first year that families, if you have a grandparent living with you, if you are housing other family members in your home and your parents are providing at least half of the support for them, you can actually put this on your FAFSA, and it increases your household size, thus decreasing the amount of money your parents are expected to contribute to a student's income. The other thing I want to point out this year is the only reason you have to claim an IRA on the FAFSA is if you take a withdrawal from it. But this is one of those years, if parents have lost their jobs and families have lost income, they have taken withdrawals from their IRAs to help pay their monthly bills. So this is something, if you've done that, you will report that on your FAFSA. Step 5 is only completed by a student who is not a dependent. Most of the students in our program are dependents. To be an independent student, a student who does not have to use their parents' information on their FAFSA, the student needs to be either A, over the age of 25, B, the student can be married, the student, if they are in active military, they do not need to use their parents' information. If the student has a dependent child, so if the student has a child of their own, they would then be able to file as independent. And the last case is if the student has ever been a ward of the state. If they've been in foster care, both parents have died, that sort of situation, then they would again be allowed to be independent and not have to claim parent or legal guardian information on their FAFSA. So section 6, and actually when a student is filling out the FAFSA, it's going to go sections 1 through 3, and then it's go to section 6, and then it'll take you back to section 4 for parent information. But section 6 has you list the colleges that you want to send your FAFSA to. I recommend getting on Google and looking up the code for all your colleges. You can do it on the FAFSA form, but it takes a while. If you Google it first and have just a list of the FAFSA codes for each of your colleges, it makes it quicker and easier to put in. The other thing I want students to do is list colleges in order of priority and list in-state schools first. So if you live in California and you're applying to California schools, prioritize those schools, list those first, then include any other schools or out-of-state schools. The following states actually prioritize state funding based on how you list the school on your FAFSA. So really pay close attention to this if you live in Connecticut, Illinois, Massachusetts, Michigan, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, West Virginia, or Vermont. Those states actually do prioritize state funding for students based on where they list schools on their FAFSA. Step 7 is to simply sign and date your FAFSA and turn it in. Now, I add step 8. We at Heartland really want to help you get your FAFSA right the first time. So my step 8 is print a copy of your FAFSA before you sign and submit it and send it to your coach to review. And the reason you want your coach to review it before you submit it is that there are certain things on the FAFSA that cannot be changed once you submit them. Other things can. You can add more colleges, no problem. You're only allowed 10 to start with, so you can go back in and add more colleges, not a problem. But there's certain financial data that you cannot change once you've submitted it. So we like to check, make sure everything's correct before you submit your FAFSA. And remember how I said if you're filling out your FAFSA, if you're using your computer, right at the bottom, right after it says sign and date, there's a button that says print a copy. If you click print a copy, it gives you a lovely PDF. Print that, save that, email that to your coach. It's the easiest way for your coaches to look at your FAFSA and check it. And then you can make corrections and then go back in and sign and date your FAFSA and submit it. So I have a handful of questions on the FAFSA that I like students to pay careful attention to because these are often end up being mistakes. Question 11 is driver's license. If you have a driver's license, put it in there. This helps keep you from getting verified. About 40% of students are selected randomly to be verified, and that means you have to turn in additional information to check your FAFSA. Question 22, we already covered, just making sure male students are registered for selective service, otherwise they're not eligible for any funding, including student loans. Questions 24 and 25 ask about parents' highest level of education. Now, if your parents have a college degree from the United States, you're going to put that in there. If your parents have a college degree, but it is not from the United States, you're going to put highest level of education is high school diploma. And the reason for this is that the US doesn't always acknowledge degrees from other countries. But secondly, students, first generation college students, which if your parents have not attended college in the US, it makes you a first generation college student, are eligible for additional funding. So just trying to make sure our students have the most eligibility for funding. And then question 26 is just worded funny. As a student, you are going to have finished your high school diploma. So that is your level of education when you file the FAFSA. Question 29 asks for college grade level. For seniors, this is never attended college, even if you've taken community college classes, dual enrollment in high school. There's also a question that says some college still first year. So if you have outside of high school enrolled in college classes and have, 2, 3, 4 college courses that are not on your high school transcript, you can put attended college before first year college student. If you're a freshman in college, then you're going to put that you're a freshman in college, sophomore in college, right? Those become very obvious. And as you progress through college, that question 29 is going to change for you. The more college credits you have, the higher your level. The reason that's on there is because students are only allowed 160 credit hours for to receive federal funding. Most college degrees take 120 credit hours, so that's why that question is there. Question 30, we talked about, it's your first bachelor's degree, even if you're attending community college, even if you're undeclared. Question 31 is, are you interested in work study? And the answer here is yes. Even if you don't want to work in campus, even if you don't want to get a job on campus, you want to make yourself eligible for work study because a professor could invite you to work in his lab, and if you don't have work study, you couldn't work in his lab. That's as simple as that. Section 6 we already talked about. Make sure you include every college you intend to apply to. If you want to add colleges later, that's fine. You can add colleges on your FAFSA up until classes start. Even once classes start, if you decide you want to transfer to a different school, you can add a new college during that active FAFSA year. So section 4 is parent information, and this is where I often get a lot of questions, so I'll do my best to make this clear. But again, if you have questions on this, because this is our recording that doesn't have Q&A with parents, please send your questions to your coaches. They will get the answer for you. Question 60 is the parent name. Which parent do you claim on your taxes? If your parents are married and filing jointly, you put both parents in there. If your parents are divorced, you're going to put the parent you live with 51% of the time. It does not matter if your parents rotate who claims you on their taxes. And my advice to you as a student is live with the parent who makes less income 51% of the time. So if that means you have to live with that parent a few extra days before December 31st this year, then do that. Because you'll just be eligible for more funding with the lower income parent. Question 82 is new this year. It's Schedule 1. If you autoload your IRS tax returns, this will automatically upload the Schedule 1. If not, I'm going to talk about that later in the ways you don't have to report things on the Schedule 1. Question 83 is a dislocated worker. And that is if your parent lost their job in 2020, taxes are based on 2019 income. So if your parents lost their job with COVID and everything that's gone on, you can mark question 83. And what will happen is the college will come back to you and ask you for some information on that to determine your financial need. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later too. The trick we've had with this year that I know from talking to a few students is that question 83 isn't showing up before the IRS tax population. Make sure your pop-ups are turned off on your computer. So that will help make sure that that loads. And if you don't see that question, add try a different browser and see if it comes up there. Question 82 through 87 are information off your tax return. The auto transfer from the IRS is fabulous. If you have to do this by hand, really literally have a copy of your tax return sitting in one pile, the FAFSA form on the other side. You're going to need a calculator, get some scratch paper because you have to take lines from your tax return, add and subtract them together to put them in here. Question 88 talks about household income sources, cash, savings, checking accounts. Now, what I want to point out here is take your bank balance and subtract your monthly expenses that you haven't paid already for the month. So if you haven't paid out your house payment, your car payment, anything that's a regular payment each month, take that out of that bank account balance. It just helps reduce that number of showing cash available. I'm not saying to lie, I'm just saying take out, because if you get paid at the beginning of the month or the middle of the month and then you have those bills that haven't been paid yet, they just want to know generally what your bank account balance is. Question 89 is all about assets and investments. And I'm actually on the next slide going to cover this more in depth. I'm going to cover everything that needs to be put in there. But things that count as assets are second homes, 529s, and all your kids' 529s. If you have 529 for 4 kids, all of those amounts for those 529s go in there. Things that you don't have to report, 401ks, IRAs, life insurance, pension plans. When it talks about the net worth of an asset, it's the current value of the asset minus any debt you owe on that asset. So I always like to give the example of a rental property that a family owns. Say the house is worth $300,000, but they still owe $200,000 on it. then the net worth of that asset is $100,000. And I'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide. The other thing that you have to report as untaxed income is like if a grandparent has a 529 and then you take a payment from that, that shows up on FAFSA. Now, if you're a senior and you haven't taken that withdrawal from your grandparents' 529 for you, that's not going to show up this year. That would show up next year. And then question 92 is IRAs. And you're only going to claim an IRA if you took a withdrawal from that. But I understand that this year that's a possibility that your family has taken a withdrawal from an IRA. So the funds from that will need to be recorded. So let's talk a little bit about assets, what you have to report and what you don't have to report. So here are the things you do have to report. Cash, bank accounts, including checking accounts, savings accounts, CDs, brokerage accounts, money market accounts, investments, stocks, bonds, restricted stock. And I always say restricted stock, you can't even access restricted stock if you have restricted stock until it's eligible, but you still have to report the entire value of that. Precious metals, UGMAs. Now, if your child has not turned 18 and will soon, please file this before they turn 18 because that UGMA will come over as a student asset as soon as they turn 18, if that's how your UGMA is set up. So please pay attention to that. College savings plans, all 529s for all children that you have. Businesses, investment farms, real estate, trust funds, and emergency funds. And real estate includes rental properties. Now, things you do not have to include. Your family's principal place of residence. You do not need to record the value of the home that your family lives in. You don't have to record family farms. Now, small businesses, and I know on the other side I said businesses, but if you have a small business with less than 100 full-time employees, you do not have to record the value of that business nor the amount of money in that business bank account. Qualified retirement plans, 401ks, 403bs, 527s, pensions, annuities, IRAs, Roth 401ks, SEEP, Symbol, and Kellogg plans. None of those are recorded. Parents' retirement funding is excluded from FAFSA. Life insurance policy and the cash value of those, not included on FAFSA. And then personal possessions, the value of your cars, a boat, software, clothes, jewelry, that kind of stuff, not included on FAFSA. So question 82, which is new this year, the Schedule 1 tax reporting. You can answer no, that you did not file a Schedule 1 if you filed a Schedule 1 that includes unemployment compensation, an Alaska permit, which I don't think we have any students from Alaska or families that have Alaska heritage, but that permit does not have to count. Educational expenses, IRA deductions, student loan interest deductions, and that would be more for future students. You can claim your student loan on your taxes, but you don't have to report that on FAFSA. And virtual currency. Those are all things that are on a Schedule 1. Now again, so that you wouldn't have to report that information on the FAFSA. Now again, if you auto load your taxes, this is going to do this automatically and you're not going to have to worry about this question. So what happens after you apply? You submit your FAFSA and your family's financial information is analyzed using the federal need-based formula. Now you are welcome to go to the FAFSA site and look at this formula. It's crazy. There's a lot of information in it and that formula changes every year. Although this year they did increase the amount a family can not have by $1,000. So if your family makes $27,000 a year or less, single, you 100% qualify for need-based aid. The other thing that will happen once you file in about 2 to 3 business days, 3 to 5, you'll get an email from FAFSA that has your student aid report. This contains information you submitted on your FAFSA, as well as your family's expected family contribution, which I'll talk about in a second, as well as if you qualify for loans, subsidized loans, if you qualify for any federal need-based aid, all that will be on your student aid report. Please, please send this to your coaches. It really helps us as coaches because we can use that, especially to ask colleges for aid in the future in the spring. If we don't have that report, it makes it really hard to say, oh, this student does have need. So please send that to your coach. And then I talked about expected family contribution. So expected family contribution is what your family is expected to contribute to your education this year. This number changes every year. That's why you file a FAFSA every year. So as family income changes, your expected family contribution will change. It's based on a formula, and then it determines need-based aid. Now, I have seen expected family contributions at 0, which means you qualify for 100% of need-based aid. I've seen them as high as $110,000. So know that that EFC number really can fluctuate, and it's truly based on family income and assets. Also, what will show up on your student aid report are student loans. And there are 2 types of student loans, and I want people to be aware of them. A subsidized student loan is a government loan that they will pay the interest on for the entire time the student is in college until 6 months after they graduate. So if you took a loan for $3,000 and it's a subsidized loan, it will be $3,000 when you graduate. An unsubsidized student loan has interest from the time you take it. Now, this year's current student loan rate is 2.75. It's incredibly low. But that student loan rate is set every May before the following fall. So I cannot tell you what, if you have a senior, what their student loan rate will be next fall, because I don't know that yet. It won't come out until May. But check that. It may make sense to take the student loan because of the interest rate. And families, you're not required to take the student loans. You're always welcome to turn them down. So don't feel like just because you were awarded a student loan from the federal government that you need to take it. The other thing that comes out of FAFSA are grants and student grants. And student grants are great. They don't need to be paid back. Most grants only apply to tuition and generally can be renewed. So that is the wonderful thing about grants. There's a student Pell Grant that's about $5,600 this year. Again, that grant amount changes every year. If you live in California, you need to apply for Cal Grant, especially if your family makes less than $150,000 a year. They can get funding. And that is a separate application. Save all your documents. Students, save all your documents. Have a copy. I want students to check their college financial aid account as soon as they're accepted to a college. And once you check that account, I want you to continue checking that account monthly to make sure they don't need extra documents. 40% of students are selected randomly for verification through the federal government. They mandate that of colleges. So what happens is they pull a student name and then they'll tell the student they have to submit, could be a tax return, could be additional documentation on investments, could be just the student's tax return. They could ask for a variety of documents in the verification process. So I encourage you as a student to have a copy of all those documents available to you that you used when filling out your FAFSA so that you can easily upload them to your school, get it to the financial aid office, and your financial aid can be awarded. Students also check your student account once you have it. FAFSA won't show up on your student account until at least 2 weeks after you've been accepted into the college, but make sure you're checking it. If you need help with FAFSA, contact your coach. They will be happy to help you. You can go to FAFSA.gov. You can call the 800 number. You can email them at FAFSAaid@ed.gov. I've had really good success with the email. You usually get a reply in 2 to 3 days, so I don't think that's too bad. And I even sent one last week and it came back pretty quick, knowing that it's really busy FAFSA time. The other thing I want to point out to students and parents, if your student is applying to attend a private institution, they are additionally going to need to fill out what's called a CSS profile. You can get the information from your coach, but private colleges look at more than just income to determine need. All state public colleges use FAFSA, and that's the only thing they use to determine financial need. Private schools with larger endowments want to look more in depth, more than income. And they really look at more of student parent income to debt ratio when they're determining funding for a CSS profile. Now, the other thing, remember I talked about the displaced worker, question 83. If for some reason your family has had a change in status since you filed your tax returns, since the 2019 tax filing season, things like a parent lost a job, they've experienced a loss in income, a loss in their business income, a loss in a small business, heaven forbid, the loss of a family member. If any of those things have happened, you can have your financial aid reevaluated. Additionally, the relief package included additional funding for colleges to help students out who are in that situation. So colleges do have some extra funding there to help out students who this situation has happened to. So step one to get that funding is complete your FAFSA, which is what we're working on now. The second thing that's going to happen is once you have decided on a college, and really you truly cannot do this until you've been accepted and decided on a college and made a commitment to that college, you're going to contact the financial aid office and let them know you've had a change in your financial status and situation. And then they're going to ask you for documentation on that. They're going to ask you for copies of unemployment, showing loss in family business, if you got to apply for a business loan, those types of things. And then they're going to make a decision on if you can have more funding or not. And the decision of the college is final. So know that once you appeal and ask for that decision, once they make that decision, you can't appeal it. That is what it is. But this year, I've experienced this year because I've had kids that are freshmen in college this year whose parents have lost income. And most of them did get some additional funding for college. So it's not too bad. Again, we're the Heartland Institute for Financial Education. We're a national 501c3 nonprofit organization. And our true goal is really to help as many students as we can through the college planning and financial aid process. You can contact our office or email us. If you're listening to this and do not have a Heartland College planning coach, contact our office. They can set you up with one of our financial aid packages, and we can help you with just financial aid. Or if you need more than that and more in-depth college planning, we can also help with that. Again, and here's my last slide, and I'll leave this up for people to take a second to take a screenshot of, but these are the links to get your FAFSA ID, to fill out your FAFSA form. FAFSA form is also available in Spanish. So if your parents are Spanish speaking, native Spanish speakers, they can have the FAFSA form in Spanish, which makes it significantly easier to fill out because the English wording on the FAFSA form is not the greatest, and it's really not easy for non-native speakers of English to understand the language in the FAFSA. Again, my name is Amy Leach. Thank you for joining us today. If you have questions, contact your Heartland College planning coach, and we're happy to help.